Snow drifted across the Ardennes like ashes from a dying fire. The forest was silent, except for the distant growl of engines rolling through the frozen mist. Sergeant William Bill Carter leaned out of his Sherman tank's hatch, the metal so cold it bit his fingers through his gloves. The smell of diesel and cordite hung in the air, the smell of a battlefield not yet finished with its dying. He pressed the throat mic to his lips. "All tanks, report in." Static answered him. Then one voice came through, thin and cracked. "This is Lucky Star, still with you." Another, calmer. "Steel Faith, ready." Then silence. Only 5 of them left. 5 tanks holding a crossroads against an army. Carter's gunner, Joe Marino, glanced up from the turret, his face pale. "They said how many are coming?" Carter hesitated. 40. The word fell heavy. Like a sentence. They'd been ordered to hold the line for 2 hours, long enough for the 3rd Armored to regroup behind them. But communications were down, air support grounded by snow, and artillery too far to help. The enemy was coming in force. Panzer IVs, half-tracks, and even rumors of a Tiger battalion. Carter's loader, Tommy Hughes, tried to make a joke. 5 against 40, huh? Those are Vegas odds." No one laughed. He looked around at his men. They were young, too young. Marino barely 20, Tommy 22. Red Miller driving the tank with hands that never stopped shaking. They'd been fighting together since Normandy. They'd survived ambushes, mines, and artillery. But this time they all knew. Survival wasn't on the menu. The wind shifted, carrying a sound that made every man freeze, the low metallic thunder of tank treads, dozens of them, slow, confident, closing in. Carter closed the hatch, sealing the crew inside. The world shrank to steel walls, dim light, and the hum of the engine. "Button up, boys," he said quietly. "Let's make them think hell just woke up." Outside, the snow began to fall heavier, muting the sounds of war. Through the periscope, Carter saw movement. Shadows in the white-black crosses painted on gray armor. The 1st Panzer appeared at the edge of the village. Behind it came more. Carter's voice was calm. "Gunner, load armor-piercing. Aim low. Take out the lead track." Marino's hands moved by instinct, sliding the heavy shell into the breech. The gun roared. The recoil slammed through the tank like a heartbeat. The Panzer's treads shattered, its hull sliding sideways into a ditch. "Good hit," Tommy shouted. Then in the distance, another German tank fired. The shells screamed past, exploding behind them. Dirt and snow rained down on the Sherman. Carter didn't flinch. "We hold this road. Nobody gets through." Over the next few seconds, the radio came alive with desperate voices. Tanks calling out positions, hits, losses. One after another, they fell silent. And then there were 5. Only 5. Carter wiped frost from his periscope and whispered to himself, "We're the wall. And the wall doesn't move." The ground shook again. The Panzers were advancing, black silhouettes in the snow, 40 to 5. The air filled with thunder. Somewhere in the chaos, Tommy muttered a prayer. Marino loaded another shell. Carter gave a single order. "Fire!" The gun thundered again, echoing across the valley. The battle for the crossroads had begun. 12 hours earlier, before the horizon burned with fire and steel, Sergeant Carter's platoon had rolled into the tiny Belgian village of Stavelot. The streets were narrow, the houses old and low, and every window seemed to hide eyes that knew the storm was coming. The temperature had dropped below freezing, and the ground was hard enough to crack under the weight of the tanks. Lieutenant Abrams, their commanding officer, stood beside his jeep, maps spread across the hood, breath curling into the cold air. "The Krauts are pushing through the forest with armor and infantry," he said. "We're the plug in the bottle. We hold this road, or the whole division gets rolled up." Carter looked at the map. The red arrows were thick, curling like blood veins toward their position. "How long are we supposed to hold?" he asked. Abrams gave a thin smile. "Until someone relieves you." Carter knew what that meant. No one was coming soon. Their 5 Shermans weren't the best the Army had. They were older M4A3 models, their armor thin, their guns weaker than the long-barreled 88s on the Panzers. But they had one advantage: mobility. Carter planned to use it like a knife. He gathered his crew by Liberty Belle, their tank. "We fight smart. We make them think there's more of us. We move after every shot, never stay still long enough for them to aim." Marino grinned nervously. "So we play hide-and-seek with Tigers?" "Yeah," Carter said. "Except when we lose, we die." They set up positions along a ridge overlooking the crossroads, a narrow gap between 2 snow-covered hills. It was perfect for slowing armor, terrible for retreat. Behind them stretched 20 miles of forest and frozen roads. Red Miller, the driver, kicked the tracks to knock off ice. "We're low on gas again," he muttered. "Then don't waste it," Carter replied. At noon, the first enemy scouts appeared, 2 half-tracks and a motorcycle. Marino's gun spoke once, and both half-tracks went up in flames. The motorcycle swerved, skidded, and vanished in smoke. The Sherman's crew cheered, but Carter stayed quiet. That was the easy part. By mid-afternoon, radio chatter grew grim. Other Allied units were pulling back under pressure. Their flank was collapsing. They were alone now, 5 tanks against whatever the Germans sent next. In the distance, they could hear artillery, muffled by snow. Then came the low drone of engines. Not trucks. Something heavier. Dozens of them. Lieutenant Abrams radioed from his tank. "All units prepare to engage armor. Estimated strength, 40. Repeat, 40. Tommy whistled under his breath. 40 tanks?" Carter's hand tightened on the radio. "Copy that. Holding position." When he looked up, the sky was already darkening, the snow thickening into a storm. They were blind, cold, and cut off. But they weren't broken. Not yet. As night fell, Carter's men ate from ration tins inside the tank, the sound of distant engines rolling through the woods like thunder. Marino said softly, "You think we can hold them?" Carter didn't answer. He just looked through the narrow slit of the periscope, at the road, the crossroads, the lifeline they were guarding. Finally, he said, "They'll come at dawn. We'll be ready." Outside, the wind howled through the trees like a warning. The trap was closing. Dawn came slow, gray, and silent. The world outside the tanks was a frozen graveyard of mist and snow. Inside Liberty Belle, condensation dripped from the metal roof, ticking like a clock counting down to death. Sergeant Carter sat in the commander's seat, headset pressed to his ears, listening to the static hum of a dead radio net. Every few seconds he tapped the side as if willing another voice to answer. None did. "Visibility?" he asked. Marino peered through his sight scope. "Maybe 200 yards. Fog's thick. If they're out there, we won't see them till they're kissing distance." Tommy chuckled dryly. "Guess we'll save ammo." Carter didn't smile. At 0613, Red Miller caught the sound first. Faint, rhythmic, unmistakable. "Tracks," he said. "A lot of them." Carter lifted his binoculars. Through the fog, dark shapes emerged. Half-tracks, light panzers, infantry moving behind them, their outlines ghost-like in the morning haze. "Hold fire," Carter ordered. "Wait till they're on the road." The Germans came in confident, unaware that 5 American tanks waited on the ridge above. They fanned out across the snow, their command half-track idling in the center of the road. Carter gave the order. "Target the lead vehicle. Fire when ready." The Sherman's 75mm gun roared. The lead half-track exploded in a fountain of fire and steel, scattering men into the ditches. Before the echo faded, the other Shermans joined in. Steel Faith took out the second truck. Lucky Star's shell ripped through an ammunition carrier, setting off a chain of detonations that tore open the valley. From the German radios came confusion. Voices shouted in panic. To them, it sounded like an ambush from a full armored company. "Keep changing positions," Carter yelled. "They'll think we've got 20 tanks up here." Each Sherman fired twice, then reversed 30 yards, tracks churning up snow and smoke. The tactic worked. From below, it looked like the ridge was alive with armor. The Germans fell back, retreating into the tree line, dragging wounded through the snow. For the moment, the field fell silent again. Inside Liberty Belle, the crew exhaled all at once. Tommy slapped Marino's shoulder. "Hell of a shot, Brooklyn." Marino grinned weakly. "Yeah. Remind me to tell my mom about it, if we live that long." But Carter wasn't celebrating. He knew the Germans wouldn't retreat twice. "They'll regroup," he said. "Send armor next time." He climbed halfway out of the hatch, scanning the tree line. The fog was lifting now, revealing the black scars of burning vehicles. It was a small victory, and a dangerous one. At 0840, they heard it. The deep, throaty rumble of heavy engines, not trucks, not half-tracks, tanks. "Here they come again," Red muttered. Through the clearing fog, Carter saw them, a line of German armor rolling forward. Panzer IVs with Tigers behind them, their turrets gleaming like predators in the snow. Marino whispered, "Jesus, they brought the big boys." Carter lowered his binoculars, his expression grim. "Then we hit the big boys first." The second battle for the crossroads had begun, the air filled with the mechanical growl of war, the smell of oil, and the sharp taste of fear. Carter keyed the radio. "All tanks, on my mark." He waited, counting heartbeats as the enemy rolled closer. "Now!" 5 Shermans fired at once, the sound shattering the dawn. The first shell hit a Panzer square in the turret, sending its hatch flying open like a lid from hell. Another German tank slewed sideways, its treads blown off. The others pushed forward through the wreckage, relentless. Inside Liberty Belle, Tommy yelled, "They're not stopping!" Carter gritted his teeth. "Neither are we." The fight for survival had truly begun. The ground trembled beneath them as the German armor rolled forward, not cautiously this time, but with the full confidence of numbers and steel. The snow muffled the sound, but the vibration reached through the soles of their boots and into their bones. 40 tanks advancing against 5. It wasn't a battle, it was an avalanche. Inside Liberty Belle, Sergeant Carter steadied himself as the tank shook. "Red, back us down 10 yards. Use the smoke for cover." The driver responded with a grunt, throwing the Sherman into reverse. Outside, white fog and gun smoke blurred the line between life and death. Through his scope, Gunner Joe Marino saw the lead Panzer crest the ridge. "Range 200, front armor." "Hold," Carter said calmly. "Wait for the belly shot." The Panzer fired first. The 88mm shell screamed past, gouging a crater yards away and throwing snow over the tank like shrapnel. "Now!" Marino fired. The Sherman's gun recoiled, the sound echoing off the valley walls. The shell struck under the Panzer's turret ring, not enough to destroy it, but enough to cripple its aim. "Hit!" Marino shouted. "Don't celebrate. Load again," Carter barked. Steel Faith fired next, its shell striking a second German tank square in the side. The vehicle erupted in flame, smoke curling into the frozen air. The Americans cheered briefly over the radio, until a return volley silenced Lucky Star. A Tiger's shell punched through its armor, detonating the ammunition inside. The explosion lit up the ridge. "Lucky Star's gone," Tommy yelled. "Keep firing," Carter snapped. The Germans fanned out, their formations tightening as they advanced. Panzer IVs took the flanks, while the Tigers held the center, methodical and merciless. The air filled with thunder. Marino switched to HE rounds, aiming for the infantry that followed the tanks. Shell after shell burst among them, scattering men into the snow. "Ammo count?" Carter asked. 20 rounds left, Tommy replied. After that, it's pistols and prayers. Carter exhaled slowly, eyes on the horizon. Then we make everyone count. The enemy was adapting now. The lead Tiger advanced under cover fire, its machine gun sweeping the ridge. A burst of tracers sparked off Liberty Belle's hull. Red cursed and ducked as a round tore through the driver's slit, grazing his arm. "I'm hit!" "How bad?" "Just blood, not death," he yelled back, gripping the controls. Carter radioed to Steel Faith. "Flank left and draw them in. Make them think we're falling back." The other Sherman surged forward, its tracks grinding through the snow. The Germans, seeing motion, redirected their guns, just as Carter planned. "Marino, Tiger, center mass, fire!" The shot rang out, striking the Tiger's exposed flank. The explosion shook the valley. Its turret lifted like a tossed coin before collapsing in smoke. Tommy whooped, "That's for Lucky Star!" But celebration was short-lived. Another shell tore through Steel Faith, splitting it open. Fire burst from the hatch. Carter turned away from the periscope, jaw clenched. They're gone. Now there were only 3 Shermans left. The Germans pressed harder, the battlefield shrinking with each minute. For every enemy tank they destroyed, 3 more pushed forward. The Americans fell back again, using burning wrecks as cover, the snow turning black with oil and ash. Inside Liberty Belle, the temperature rose from the heat of the engine and the fear that clung to every breath. Tommy reloaded, hands trembling. "Bill," he said quietly, "how much longer we gotta hold?" Carter didn't look at him. "Until the ammo's gone. Or we are." Outside, the thunder of the Panzers grew louder. The sky was a haze of fire and falling snow. For 3 hours, 5 Shermans had defied 40 German tanks. But now the line was cracking. Carter looked through his scope, watching the next wave approach. "They think they've got us," he said. "Let's make them earn it." And again, the gun roared. By the second hour, the air above the ridge was thick with smoke, snow, and the smell of burned oil. The ground was cratered and slick, torn by explosions. The 5 Shermans were down to 3. Steel Faith and Lucky Star were gone, their twisted hulls burning on the slope below. But somehow Liberty Belle was still alive. Sergeant Carter knew brute force wouldn't save them now. He switched tactics, not fighting for victory, but for time. "We fight like ghosts," he told his men. "Shoot, move, disappear. Never give them the same target twice." Marino nodded, wiping grime from his eyes. "Copy that. Ghosts it is." They used every trick they knew. Carter ordered smoke rounds fired to blind the German gunners, then reversed into new positions between blasts. Every time the fog cleared, Liberty Belle was gone, firing from another ridge or another barn ruin. The Germans began firing at shadows, wasting shells on empty snowbanks. "Make them think there's more of us," Carter muttered. "That's how we win." Through his periscope, Marino spotted a Panzer IV inching forward through the smoke. He waited for it to turn, revealing its thinner side armor. Then he fired. The shell hit low right under the turret. The explosion was small at first. Then the ammunition inside cooked off, sending flames bursting through the hatches. "Hit confirmed!" Marino shouted, reloading. But Liberty Belle wasn't unscathed. A shell detonated near the left track, blowing snow and debris against the hull. Inside, Tommy coughed through the smoke. "Track's holding, but not for long." Carter didn't hesitate. "We move before it breaks. Red, take us to the farmhouse. We'll use it for cover." They roared forward, the Sherman's treads churning the snow as bullets ricocheted off its armor. Machine gun fire clanged against the turret like hail. They burst through the broken fence line and slid behind the half-destroyed farmhouse, using the stone walls as a shield. Tommy pried open the ammo crate. "That's it. 10 rounds left." "Make them count," Carter said. Minutes passed. The Germans regrouped, moving cautiously now. The illusion had worked. They still thought they were facing a full American unit. Carter's radio crackled with faint signals. Allied command, still out of range. No reinforcements, no rescue. "Bill," Red said, voice low. "We can't keep this up. They'll box us in. Then we'll fight our way out before they do," Carter replied. The next Panzer appeared through the smoke, its gun turning toward the farmhouse. Marino was ready. He fired first. The shell struck the German tank's treads, immobilizing it. The Panzer tried to rotate its turret, but Carter gave the order before it could. "He round. Aim for the fuel deck." Marino fired again. The second hit tore the tank apart. The crew inside never made it out. "8 rounds left," Tommy whispered. The radio crackled again, clearer this time. A distant voice, half drowned in static. "Hold position. Reinforcements en route." Carter's eyes narrowed. "How far?" No reply, just static. He turned back to his men. "We hold until they get here, however long that takes." For the next half hour, they fought like cornered wolves, repositioning, firing, retreating, and striking again. German shells fell closer with each volley. The farmhouse began to crumble around them. Tommy laughed bitterly as dust rained from the ceiling. "If we live through this, drinks are on me." Marino grinned weakly. "Only if they're not German." Outside, the enemy was regrouping again. Slower now. Cautious. Unsure. Liberty Belle was running low on ammo, fuel, and hope. But the men inside still breathed, still fought, still held the line. In the chaos, Carter looked through the periscope and saw a Tiger tank halted in the distance, its commander scanning the field with binoculars. For a second, their eyes almost met. Two men, enemies, both trying to survive the madness. Carter whispered, "You'll have to kill me to take this road." He gave the order. "Fire." The shell left the barrel with a crack that split the air, a single shot against an army. And somehow, it hit. By the third hour, the battlefield was a living nightmare. The snow that had blanketed the fields at dawn was gone, replaced by mud, ash, and fire. The smoke was so thick that even the sun seemed afraid to rise above it. Inside Liberty Belle, the temperature climbed past endurance. Sweat mixed with soot on the men's faces, and the metal walls burned to the touch. The roar of the engine blended with the endless thunder of artillery. It felt like the earth itself wanted them buried. Tommy slammed another shell into the breach. "That's 5 left." Marino didn't look up from the scope. "Then we'll kill 5 more." Outside, the German tanks advanced again, slower now, cautious, deliberate, learning from their losses. Carter watched through his periscope as the Tigers repositioned across the valley, using wrecks for cover. They were adapting. Every second, the American advantage of surprise faded. "They're spreading out," he said. "They want to flank us." Red's hands shook on the controls. "Bill, we can't take a hit from those 88s, not even close range." "I know," Carter replied. "That's why they won't get the chance." He keyed the radio to the 2 remaining Shermans. "Hold your fire till they crest the ridge. Then hit the lead Tiger. We drop the head, the body stumbles." Minutes crawled by. The noise built again, the metallic growl of the German formation. Through the fog, Carter could see their silhouettes. 15, 20, maybe more. The ridge trembled under the weight of treads. Marino adjusted his aim. "I've got the lead." Carter whispered, "Fire." The shot landed dead center. The Tiger's turret erupted, a plume of black smoke marking the hit. The German column hesitated just for a second, and the Shermans fired together. Another Panzer burst into flame. "Good hit! Keep it up!" Carter shouted. Then the reply came, a storm of 88mm shells tearing across the ridge. Iron Angel, one of the last Shermans, vanished in an instant, its fuel tank igniting like a sunburst. The blast rocked Liberty Belle, knocking Marino back from the scope. "Angel's gone!" Tommy yelled. Carter grabbed the headset. "Falcon, fall back! Use the wrecks for cover!" But there was no answer. The radio hissed with static. He looked through the periscope and saw Falcon burning in the field below. They were alone. Only Liberty Belle remained. The next shell struck close enough to lift the Sherman's left tread clear off the ground. The crew was thrown sideways. Red grunted as his head struck the periscope housing. Blood ran down his temple. "I'm good," he shouted, forcing a laugh. "Just don't let him get my good side." "Shut up and drive," Marino snapped. Carter looked around the cramped interior. 3 men left, 1 tank, surrounded by fire. "We're not dying in a steel coffin," he said quietly. "We fight until it stops moving. Then we move on foot." Outside, a Tiger crested the ridge, its cannon turning toward them. Carter didn't think. He just acted. "He round! Fuel deck!" Marino fired. The shell hit, detonating the Tiger's rear armor. The explosion threw debris high into the air. "Direct hit!" Tommy cried. But before he could reload, another German shell slammed into Liberty Belle's right flank. The blast deafened them. The lights went out. Smoke filled the compartment. Red coughed violently. "She's hit bad, Bill." "Evacuate," Carter ordered. Tommy grabbed his sidearm and kicked the hatch open. The cold air outside hit like a slap. They tumbled into the snow, coughing, crawling behind the wreck. The tank still burned, its gun pointed defiantly toward the enemy. For a long moment, the 3 men crouched in the mud, the fire reflecting in their eyes. Above them, the German tanks paused, wary, cautious, expecting another shot. Then Carter, his face blackened with soot, looked at his men. "We held 3 hours," he said. "That's more than command ever asked." Marino managed a grin through bloodied teeth. "And we ain't dead yet." The sound of engines roared again, but this time from behind. American reinforcements. Carter lifted his head toward the noise. Dozens of Shermans appeared over the horizon, cutting through the haze. The cavalry had arrived. He exhaled, finally letting himself believe. "We did it," he whispered. Behind them, Liberty Belle exploded one last time, the final roar of a tank that refused to surrender. When the first American reinforcements rolled over the ridge, it felt unreal, like a hallucination after too many hours of smoke and terror. The familiar silhouettes of Shermans and half-tracks emerged through the haze, sunlight glinting off their armor. Their engines roared not like machines, but like salvation. Sergeant Carter blinked through the grime and blood on his face. "Tell me that's real." Marino nodded, eyes wet. "If it's not, we're all already dead." The first formation of tanks thundered past them, their turrets turning, guns blazing at the retreating German armor. The battlefield erupted again, but this time the thunder was American. The tide had turned. The surviving Panzers broke formation, reversing down the valley under a curtain of Allied fire. For the first time in 3 hours, the air wasn't filled with incoming shells. Just the sound of engines, men shouting orders, and the steady crack of rifles. The Germans were running. Carter collapsed to his knees, the adrenaline finally leaving his body. 3 hours, he muttered. "We just had to hold 3 hours." Tommy sank down beside him, laughing breathlessly. "Guess we're lousy at math." A medic sprinted toward them, ducking behind the burning hulk of Liberty Belle. "You men from that tank?" he asked, glancing at the smoking wreck. Carter nodded. The medic's jaw tightened. "You're lucky. Reinforcements were 30 minutes out. You held longer than anyone thought possible." Marino looked back at what was left of their tank, a scorched carcass, black smoke curling from the turret. He stared for a long time. "She bought us every minute of that," he said softly. The reinforcements cleared the valley, pushing the Germans into full retreat. Broken Panzers littered the snow like metal corpses. The air was thick with the smell of oil, blood, and victory. Carter stood, his legs trembling. "We've got wounded out there," he said to the medic. "And bodies. Good men. Get your people to start collecting." An hour later, the battle was officially over. The field that had been a graveyard of Shermans now swarmed with medics, engineers, and soldiers. Smoke rose from wrecks and snow continued to fall. Quiet, almost merciful, covering the scars of what had just happened. A young lieutenant approached Carter, clipboard in hand. "Sir, Command wants to know who was in charge of this sector." Carter wiped his face. "Nobody was in charge. We just refused to die." The lieutenant hesitated, then extended a hand. "Whatever you did here, Sergeant, you stopped 40 tanks with 5. That'll be in the reports." Carter didn't take the hand. He just nodded toward the burning field. "Tell the reports about them," he said quietly. That night, as the temperature dropped and the fires died down, Carter sat beside the remains of Liberty Belle. The tank's gun barrel pointed toward the horizon, still defiant, even in death. Tommy and Marino joined him, silent. They shared what little rations they had left, cold beans, hard bread, and didn't speak for a while. The stars above were clear again, the smoke finally clearing from the valley. Marino broke the silence first. "Think anyone will believe us?" Carter gave a weary smile. "They don't have to. We were there." The sound of engines hummed in the distance. The rest of the division moving forward, chasing what was left of the German armor. The war would go on. But for these men, the front line ended here. Before turning in, Carter took a piece of chalk from his pocket, something he used to mark coordinates, and scrawled words onto the side of Liberty Belle's ruined hull. She held the line. He stood there for a moment, staring at it, then saluted the wreck. As dawn approached, the snow began to fall again, soft, silent, covering the tank and its scars like a white shroud. 2 days later, the men of what was left of Carter's platoon were pulled off the line and sent to the rear for debriefing. They rode in silence in the back of a supply truck, the smell of burned oil and cordite still clinging to their uniforms. None of them spoke. None of them slept. They'd fought longer than any human body should have been able to. At dawn, the truck rolled into a temporary command post, a farmhouse converted into headquarters. Officers and clerks moved like ghosts between radio tables and maps. Outside, the motor pool roared with the sound of refueling tanks and repair crews welding armor. The war machine never stopped. An adjutant stepped up as the men climbed out. "Sergeant Carter?" Carter nodded, his face gray with fatigue. "You and your crew are wanted in the main tent. The colonel's expecting you." The 3 men walked inside, their boots crunching on straw-covered floors. Inside, the air was thick with cigar smoke and the sharp tang of ink and oil. Maps of the Ardennes hung across the canvas walls, dotted with red and blue pins. At the center stood Colonel Whitaker, tall, rigid, with the kind of face carved from command itself. He looked up from the table as they entered. "So you're the men from the ridge?" Carter didn't answer. He simply nodded. The colonel studied them for a moment, his eyes lingering on their soot-blackened faces and torn uniforms. "You held against 40 Panzers, 3 hours. Command says you lost 4 tanks." "Yes, sir," Carter said. "We held until the line arrived." Whitaker tapped his finger on the map. "The reinforcements reached the ridge at 1410. If you'd fallen before then, they'd have hit us in the flank. You saved the sector." Marino looked down, uncomfortable. "We were just doing our job, sir." Whitaker gave a dry smile. "Your job was to delay, not to destroy a company of armor." He reached for a folder on the table and opened it. Inside were reconnaissance photos taken after the battle, black and white images showing a valley littered with burning tanks. 38 confirmed kills, he said quietly. "Not bad for 5 Shermans." The men didn't speak. Carter just stared at the photos, the black scars where his friends had died. The colonel closed the folder. "There'll be citations, probably medals. But I want to know one thing, Sergeant. How did you hold that long?" Carter hesitated, then finally said, "We didn't think about dying, sir. We just thought about the next minute. Then the next. The tank did the rest." Whitaker raised an eyebrow. The tank? Carter nodded. Liberty Belle. She never quit. We couldn't either. Whitaker leaned back in his chair, expression unreadable. Then he said, almost to himself, "That's the kind of war we're fighting now. Not men against men, machines against time." He dismissed them with a salute, one that carried quiet respect. "Get cleaned up, boys. You're off the line for a week. After that, we'll see where you fit next." Outside, the men walked past rows of tanks, some freshly repaired, some wrecked and abandoned. Mechanics swarmed over them, welding, patching, testing engines. Marino stopped and ran a hand along the armor of one newly painted Sherman. "Looks just like her," he said softly. Carter nodded. "Then let's make sure we don't waste what she bought us." They stood there for a long time, the hum of engines filling the cold air. War had a way of erasing moments like theirs, turning sacrifice into statistics. But for these three men, the ridge would never fade. Years later, long after the war had ended and the sound of engines had faded from Europe's skies, Bill Carter returned to the ridge. The land had changed. The trenches were gone, the wreckage cleared, the forests grown back. But when he closed his eyes, he could still hear it. The echo of cannon fire, the grinding of treads, the shouts of men refusing to fall. He was no longer a young sergeant, but a quiet man with gray hair and hands that still shook when thunder rolled. He had come not with a unit, but with a wreath of poppies and a worn photograph of his crew. The French government had placed a small memorial at the site, a simple stone marker half covered by moss. It read, "To the men who held the line." Carter knelt before it. The air was still, save for a soft wind moving through the grass. He laid the photograph at the base of the stone. 5 smiling faces leaning out of Liberty Belle before the battle, unaware that only 3 of them would survive the day. "I told you we'd come back," he whispered. Behind him, a young French farmer approached. "Monsieur Carter?" the man asked in halting English. "You fought here?" "Yes," Carter said, "a long time ago." The farmer nodded toward the ridge. "My grandfather said when he was a boy he saw smoke here for 2 days. He said the Americans stopped the Germans, right there." Carter looked out over the valley. The memory returned with painful clarity. The Tigers moving like predators through the mist, the fire that turned the snow black, the smell of diesel and fear. "He's right," Carter said quietly. "We stopped them. But the cost..." He trailed off. The farmer placed a hand over his heart. "My family is here because you did." Carter nodded, his throat tightening. He hadn't come for thanks, but the words struck deeper than he expected. He stayed there until sunset. The light turned the ridge golden, and the stone marker cast a long shadow across the grass. For a moment he imagined hearing laughter again. Marino's wisecracks, Tommy's jokes, the hum of Liberty Belle's engine before it was torn apart. Pulling a small object from his coat pocket, he placed it beside the photo, a brass shell casing engraved with a single word: "Hold." He stood, brushed the dirt from his knees, and looked to the horizon. The world had moved on, faster, louder, more complicated. But out here, the line still held, quiet and eternal. As he walked back toward his jeep, he heard footsteps behind him. It was the farmer again, calling out, "Monsieur Carter, one question, please." Carter turned. "Why did you fight so hard? You could have fallen back. You could have lived." Carter thought for a long moment. Then he smiled, tired but certain. "Because someone had to. And because she..." He nodded toward where Liberty Belle had once stood. "Never gave up on us." He drove away slowly, the road winding through the same hills that had once burned with war. Behind him, the ridge glowed in the fading light, quiet and whole again. Bill Carter never wrote a book about the war. He never gave interviews or stood on parade grounds. When people asked what he did in 1944, he just said, "We held." But for the men who'd survived alongside him, for the mechanics who built the Shermans, for the generations that followed, his story became more than a memory. It became a lesson. After returning home to Kansas, Carter worked as a mechanic on farm equipment. He said the sound of engines comforted him. Sometimes, when he fixed an old tractor, he'd run a hand over the metal and say softly, "You'd have liked her, Belle." He married, raised 2 sons, and never stopped teaching them the same truth he'd learned on that frozen ridge, that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the choice to stay when everyone else runs. Years later, his eldest son joined the Army. Before shipping out, he asked his father, "How did you do it, Dad? How did you fight through all that?" Carter didn't answer at first. Then he said, "You don't fight for glory. You fight so the man next to you doesn't have to die alone." In time, the world forgot the ridge. The history books mentioned the battle in passing, a footnote in the long grind across Europe. But among tankers, the legend of Liberty Belle lived on. Mechanics spoke of her like a ghost that refused to die. And veterans told recruits that 5 Shermans once stopped 40 Panzers because they refused to move. Decades later, when a military historian tracked Carter down for an oral history project, he found the old sergeant sitting on a porch overlooking endless fields of wheat. The man looked smaller now, but his eyes were still sharp. "You were there," the historian said. "The stand that held the valley." Carter nodded. "Do you remember what you were thinking in those last minutes?" Carter smiled faintly. "Yeah, I remember thinking the tank was breathing. I remember thinking we weren't fighting the Germans anymore. We were fighting time." The historian hesitated. "And when you finally saw the reinforcements?" Carter's eyes softened. "I didn't feel relief, just quiet. Like the war itself stopped shouting." He leaned back in his chair, the wind moving through the tall grass around them. "Everyone talks about who won the war," he said. "But the truth is, nobody wins a war. You just do your part to make sure the right people get to go home." That night, as the sun set over the plains, Carter took out a small notebook. Inside, in fading pencil, was a single line written decades earlier on the back of a ration wrapper. "Hold until help arrives." He smiled, folded it closed, and whispered, "We did." The war that had defined his youth was gone, but its echoes lived in every free sky, every open field, every quiet morning, untouched by tanks or fear. Because sometimes history isn't written by generals or presidents. It's written by 5 men inside a single tank who refuse to let the world fall apart. And in that, Liberty Belle never truly stopped fighting.